Fu. He is an industry-recognized thought leader in digital strategy and integrated marketing, and former chief digital officer of Omnicom's healthcare consultancy group, a more than $100 million agency group serving pharma, medical device, and healthcare clients. It's quite an honor to have you, Dr. Fu. With over 25 years of management consulting experience creating and optimizing marketing across traditional and digital channels, Dr. Fu is going to talk to us about how bad guys commit ad fraud and trick attribution reporting.
Thank you, Horatio. Glad to be here with you all.
Good to have you. And the floor is yours.
All right. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about ad fraud. I'm going to start at the beginning and talk about some of the research that I've seen and conducted over the years. And then I'm going to also talk a little bit about how it's going to affect performance marketers. So let's start with the basics. Probably everyone is familiar with the concept of ad fraud. At the most simple, it is ads shown to bots and not to humans. So a lot of marketers, when they're doing digital marketing, they're assuming that their ads are being shown when humans visit a web page, and then when that page loads, the ads load. But with the rise of programmatic ad exchanges, now we have ads going to hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of long-tail sites. Some of those sites are actually not real. They're just fake sites designed solely for the purpose of running ads. And we now have, billions upon billions of ad impressions being bought and sold. So a portion of those are now created by bots. That means instead of a human going to a web page, we now have software programs that deliberately load the pages over and over again for the purpose of generating a lot of ad impressions to sell. So in those cases, the marketers are not getting what they're paying for. And if you take a look at the digital marketing ecosystem, a lot of my comments are going to be US centric for the time being, because that's where the bulk of my work is. But we're going to use it as an example of what other markets and industries should be aware of. So in the US, the Interactive Advertising Bureau, the trade association called IAB, has been tracking digital spending for years and years. And there's four main buckets of digital spend: impressions, clicks, leads, and sales. And when you look at the first two buckets, impressions and clicks, together they represent 92% of digital ad spending here in the US. And I would imagine with a little bit of variation, it's similar in other markets as well. But CPM, so cost per thousand, is the way a lot of the display ads are sold. And then CPC, cost per click, is the way a lot of the search ads are sold. And then obviously there's some blending between those two business models. But the key here is to notice that these first two buckets represent 92% of digital spend. So a lot of the ad fraud that I'm seeing are focused on these first two buckets, because obviously there's the most money to steal here. So the bad guys are going to focus their attention and their botnets on these first two. But towards the latter half of this presentation, I'll also talk about how bad guys are also targeting performance marketers that tend to focus on cost per lead, cost per acquisition, affiliate sales, and things like that. But keeping with the high level, most of the ad fraud is done very simply, and it's almost like a three-step process. First, the bad guys are setting up enormous quantities of fake websites. And this is just one example where there's no content whatsoever on these sites, and you'll see 10 ads on the page. And these sites are designed solely for the purpose of running as many ads as possible. But then you would ask, okay, if these are fake sites and there's no people going to them, how do they get the traffic? So the next, the step number 2 is to go buy all that traffic. So if you just Google buy traffic for my website, or buy views, or buy followers, there's a lot of these things that you can just buy online. So these sites are going to buy traffic and point it to their own website. Right? So then they're able to generate a lot of page views and therefore a lot of ad impressions. So when they generate this ad inventory, then they sell it through open exchanges, right? So these ad exchanges, ad networks, On the right-hand side, just to give you a preview, each row is a domain or an app, and these are daily impressions. So in that little magnified area, you can see that each of these apps is selling approximately 1 billion impressions per day. So, that's the kind of quantity that we're talking about. So a lot of these ads are now shown to bots and not to humans. And collectively, it's having a tremendous impact on our entire industry. So advertisers used to buy directly from publishers. So when they pay the publisher is going to show the ad on their sites. But now with programmatic ad exchanges, a large portion of those dollars are not going to the publishers. They're actually being extracted by the ad exchanges themselves, and some of it's actually going to the bad guys. So that red arrow is kind of like taking a right turn right outside of the ad ecosystem. So the money is going to the bad guys and not to the publishers. So the marketers are not getting the marketing effect that they're looking for, and the publishers are not getting the ad revenue that they're hoping to get. All right. So that's kind of at a high level what ad fraud looks like. And let me show you a few of the tools that the bad guys are using to commit this fraud. So some of these tools are to generate more ad impressions so that they have more inventory to sell. And other tools are used to disguise the fraud. So it makes it harder for the buyers to know that there is fraud, and it's harder for the fraud detection to detect it. So this first example is where a publisher, in this case Newsweek, was using malicious JavaScript code to alter the viewability measurements so that their ads appear to be viewable when they're not. So I'm going to kind of use an offline example. It's almost like there's a whole bunch of rotten apples that you cannot sell. But by tricking the viewability measurements, they're basically making those rotten apples appear to be fresh apples so then they can sell it. So in this case, it's simply a matter of using this readily available JavaScript code to trick the measurements, right? So a lot of these fraud detection technologies are based on JavaScript. Similarly, the viewability measurements are based on JavaScript tags. So what they're doing, these attackers, these fraudsters, are using their own JavaScript to just alter the measurement. So whether it's to make something that's not viewable appear to be viewable, or make something that is actually a bot appear to be not a bot. That's how they cover their tracks and disguise the bot traffic. And yes, anyone that has questions, please feel free to type it into chat. I'll try to keep an eye on that and try to answer the questions as I go along. All right, so this is another tool that they use. So remember I said earlier, these are sites that have no real traffic because humans don't even know about them. So how do they get all that traffic? They basically buy all of it. And common sense will tell you there's not a whole bunch of humans sitting around with nothing to do but to go to those specific websites. However, it is extremely easy for a botnet operator to say, okay, well, I need this many page views on this particular domain, right? And then the entire botnet will go there and drive that traffic. So here are just a few examples. In the middle example, you'll see a traffic seller called HitLeap. And what you can do is buy traffic of different quality. So what quality means is this kind of bot traffic able to bypass fraud detection, right? So they do some certain things like higher quality traffic means the bots are doing more actions. For example, they're faking the mouse movements, they're faking the page scrolling and other things to trick the detection. So it's not actually higher quality. It's actually that the bots are doing more things and they're more successful at tricking the bot detection to appear to be valid. And then, oh, by the way, if any of you want to do this yourself, you can even go to this service and have a cloud capability, a cloud service where you can actually host your own bots. Now, don't anyone on this call do that, but there are all these services and tools that are available very widely and publicly available to fraudsters to commit fraud, right? And then the other question that might come along is, okay, well, if these are bots coming from data centers and not actually humans visiting the web page, wouldn't you be able to catch them very easily because you can see that they're coming from data centers? Well, here's another set of tools that the bad guys use to disguise their traffic, right? So a bot is coming from a data center. It's basically a browser created in AWS, Amazon Web Services, and it's designed to load web pages. But what they also do is they disguise the traffic by routing it or bouncing it through these residential proxy services. So what that means is the traffic that would have originated from a data center can now be disguised to appear to be coming from a residential IP address. And so if it looks like it's coming from a residential IP address, it's possible that it's a human, right, that's surfing the web from their home. So then the bot detection companies are hesitant to block that, right? So they say, okay, well, maybe it's actually a human, so we're going to let that through. So by disguising the traffic to appear to be residential, they're able to get by many, many more of those detections. Okay, so I'm literally scratching the surface today because we have only a half hour together, but these are examples of tools that the bad guys are using to not only create the fraudulent impressions, but also to disguise it so that it looks legitimate. And there's dozens of other tools. Some are far more advanced than these that I'm showing you. But just to give you a sense of how large of a problem this is, so I'm going to give you some context and some sizing. Basically, I'm not going to look at the fraud detection reports. I'm only going to look at the news reports of large botnets being discovered. And that's because a lot of the fraud detection reports that are published by industry trade associations will tell you that fraud is low, fraud is going lower, or that fraud is so low you don't have to worry about it. Right, so at least here in the US, some of the national trade associations have been saying for years that fraud is 1% or 0.5%, and their policies have solved it. But whereas they're saying the fraud is low, every single year we see a new largest ever fraud scheme being discovered and documented. So in 2016, some of you might remember there was a huge botnet called MethBot, and it was focused on or targeting video ads because those were higher in CPM. So again, the bad guys go where the money is, and they're trying to steal from the most expensive kind of ads because that's how they can make more profit. So in 2016, it was called MethBot. In 2017, it was called HifeBot. In 2018, it was called Eve. So literally year after year after year, we're finding the largest ever botnets being discovered. 2019, we are moving into mobile. And so these are large scale apps that have been downloaded many, many times. In this case, more than 2 billion times. So these are apps that are residing on people's mobile devices. And these apps are committing fraud in the background. So even when the phone is not being used, even when the app is not being used, they're still loading ads in the background. And oh, by the way, they're also doing things like click flooding, which I'll get into and how that impacts performance marketing later. But they're doing many kinds of fraud at the same time while they're on the mobile devices. And then 2020, it started with Ice Bucket, right? So there's actually many more that are coming up. So it's almost like year after year, month after month, we see these large scale discoveries of fraud going on, right? And so the more money that marketers move into mobile, the more the bad guys are going to commit fraud there because that's a larger bucket of money they can steal from. So 2018, November 2018, March of 2019. So a lot of these are apps that have been downloaded many, many times from mainstream app stores like Google Play Store. Okay, so these are millions of apps on millions of phones committing ad fraud. And if we just even look at this year, 2020, it's literally every single month we're now having a larger and larger discovery. So I have links to all of these news items in the deck, and we can share that out later. So feel free to click on those and you can read it for yourself. But in CTV, which is now probably the most popular channel and the channel that's most in demand, we're also seeing many, many cases of ad fraud, right? So in January, it was called DiCaprio. In March, it was called Monarch. April, Ice Bucket. September, Multiterra. So there might be one or two more before the year's over, right? But bottom line is, in CTV, a lot of people will say, oh, well, how can there be fraud? Because, is there malware on Roku devices? Well, no, the fraud is actually even easier because the bots can pretend to be a Safari browser or Firefox or Chrome, but they can also pretend to be Roku sticks or these streaming boxes. So by pretending to be Roku devices, they can now start to create or generate CTV ad impressions out of thin air. So it's exactly the same as what they've been doing when we're talking about display ads, video ads, mobile ads. Now they're just doing in CTV. So all of this is because there's so many long tail websites, apps, and CTV channels that no one has ever heard of, that they're now basically using bots to create the traffic and create the ad impressions to sell. So how does this actually impact performance marketers? Because I'm willing to bet a lot of the performance marketers are saying, oh, well, we're immune to this kind of fraud because we don't buy the ads. We don't pay on a CPM basis. We don't even pay on a cost per click basis. We only pay when we get the lead. We only pay when we get the sale. Or in this case, Uber will say, we only pay when we get the app install, right? So these are called CPI campaigns, cost per install campaigns. So we think we're immune to fraud. But let me use this example to illustrate why you shouldn't make that assumption. So Uber for years have been paying for app install campaigns. Basically, they wanted more people to install the Uber app. But when analyst Kevin Frisch started looking at the data, it just didn't make any sense whatsoever. So he ran an experiment. He cut $120 million out of their $150 million of spend, the digital budgets that were dedicated to these app install campaigns. And what he noticed was that the quantity of app installs or the rate of app installs didn't change when he turned off the paid app install spending. What that means is these are what we call organic installs. So for example, humans would have installed the Uber app anyway because they wanted to install it, not because they saw an ad and then clicked on that ad. So what was happening is that these organic app installs that would have happened anyway are being transformed or claimed by the mobile exchanges to have come from mobile app install campaigns, right? So this is called attribution stealing, so they're claiming credit for these app installs that would have happened. Okay, so the way you look at this chart is that black line stayed the same, even when the green area, meaning the budget, got cut significantly. And you'll see the blue line is organic signups, and the red line is paid signups, or these paid app install campaigns. Basically, when the budget was turned off, the blue line rose and the red line declined. So they basically swapped places. So all the stuff that was being marked as paid app installs were actually organic, meaning they would have happened anyway. And so right now, Uber is suing 100 mobile exchanges for this kind of fraud, which is falsifying the placement reports to basically making it appear that the ads ran on legitimate publishers and apps, or fabricating these reports entirely. So in some cases, there were no ads that ever ran. And sometimes the app installs didn't even happen. But basically, all they had to do was create the reports to make it look like it happened. Okay, so that's a key lesson that I'm hoping everyone takes away from this. Don't assume that if you're paying only on the lead and on the sale, that you're immune to ad fraud. So let me show you a few other examples of things that can be tricked, right? So on the upper left, we've done a demo of a mouse moving around on the page. And it's not a human moving the mouse around on the page. It's actually programmatic, meaning it's a bot doing that, right? So bots, sometimes we can see it's a bot easily because the traces are straight lines, right? And humans can't move a mouse in a perfectly straight line. So that's a dead giveaway. But the more advanced bots now are making the mouse movement patterns appear to be very realistic. And on top of that, some of them can even record real mouse movement patterns and then just play that back in order to trick the bot detection. Okay, so even when you see mouse movements, don't assume that it's actually a human navigating the page. On the bottom left, you'll see the code that's now used to create fake page scrolling, right? Or scrolling on a mobile device. All of that can be faked. And then on the upper right-hand side, you'll see how Google Analytics can be tricked. So we've done a demo and others have done a demo where they can actually inject data right into the Google Analytics. So some of the traffic sellers, right, when you go online and buy traffic from someone, sometimes they won't even generate the traffic to your site, right? They're going to try to save money and time and resources. They're not even going to have a bot load your web page. All they're going to do is send false data into your Google Analytics to make it appear that you got the traffic when there was no traffic sent at all. Okay, so just be aware that if you use Google Analytics, people can inject false data into your Google Analytics to make it appear that you got traffic. Okay, and all of this stems from kind of a security vulnerability. So if you think about the click URLs, click trackers, right? The URLs have some variables and parameters in the URL string. All of that is in the clear. It's in plain text. So what the bad guys are starting to do is they're basically copying off those variables and then using their bots to repeatedly hit those click trackers with the proper variables in them. So in that way, they're sending data, they're sending false data into your attribution platform to make it appear that some event happened or some click happened when the click didn't actually happen, and it certainly wasn't being done by a human. All right. So, there's a question in chat saying, how do we determine some of this stuff? If you look closely, you'll start to notice some strange patterns. Like if you're getting, 100 clicks from the same users, that doesn't make any sense because humans don't click an ad 100 times. Humans don't even click an ad one time, right? So when you see these kinds of things, again, if you look at your own analytics, you should be able to tell something is strange here. And then the other really, really simple thing is if you're getting a lot of clicks in the overnight hours, like literally between 1 a.m. and 5 a.m., and you're getting a lot of clicks, humans are sleeping at that time, right? So if you're getting a lot of clicks, it's probably these fake mobile apps doing click injection or click flooding. So some of those things, again, using common sense, you can start to pick out. And then this next example is don't assume that if you're getting completed leads that they're real, right? The right-hand example from CNBC is that in a T-Mobile promotional contest, it's basically the bots kept winning all of them. So there was a person in Pennsylvania that created a bot that successfully filled out the forms and also solved the CAPTCHAs. So they can actually submit these entries into the promotional giveaways. And they were actually winning many, many gift cards, like $10 gift cards, $100 gift cards, to the point where someone noticed, okay, why are all these gift cards being sent to the same small town in Pennsylvania? I think it was called Chadds Ford, Pennsylvania. And so when they looked into it, turns out these hundreds of winners all had the same P.O. box where all the gift cards got sent. So then they caught it. But the moral of the story here is to tell you that even with CAPTCHAs, all of these online forms can be easily filled and solved by bots, right? And so in the past, when I do some consulting for university marketers, they'll say, we're getting all these leads coming in from high school students who applied to our college, right? Or send us some more information. As it turns out, when they followed up with that high school student, they would say, oh, well, I never came to your website. I never applied, right? So what's happened is that the bots are taking complete information from databases, filling out these forms, and then getting paid the cost per lead. And in certain industries, a cost per lead could be $50, could be $100, could be $300. So those bots are completing those forms and getting paid on a cost per lead basis. So again, don't assume that even though you're doing CPL and performance marketing, that you're immune to ad fraud. Okay. So I've written 3 articles on this. I'm not going to go into any details. You can click the links later when we share the deck. The long story short is these are just examples of where if you have attribution URLs that are in the clear, that are plain text, the bad guys can just copy that attribution URL and just repeatedly hit it. And that applies to CTV as well. So the standards that are set by the IAB will say you can now call a particular URL that says this video was watched 1/4 of the way, or 1/2 of the way, or 3/4 of the way, or completely watched. So by calling those attribution URLs, those click trackers, the bad guys can make it look like a user had watched the entire video and also the entire video ad. So again, just be on the lookout that those things can also be tricked. So just like someone asked earlier, how can I tell something is wrong, right? Let me show you some examples straight out of Google Analytics, so you don't need any specialized analytics. So here we are looking at 4 of the top referrers based on traffic, right? It's 4 of the sites that are sending traffic to your website, okay? When you look at a couple of things here, first you look at the time series pattern. You'll notice that there's all these different bumps, peaks and valleys, and they all correspond perfectly to each other, right? Even though the volumes are different, right? The heights are different. They go up and down in exactly the same places. So these top 4 referring sites have exactly the same up and down pattern, right? That's not normal. How can 4 different websites have the exact same traffic patterns coming to your site? And then if you look further, you look at the pages per session. They're all roughly 4.6, 4.7, right? That's also abnormal. How can traffic from 4 different websites all have the exact same characteristics? And look at the bounce rates. First of all, those are super low for normal bounce rates. And then second, they're all in the 1 to 2 to 3% range. And then the last nail in this coffin is if you look at the operating system, each of those sources is basically 99.9% Android traffic. That's not normal, right? If it was a real site that has real humans visiting, you're going to see a variety of different devices like iPhone and so on and so forth. Okay, so these are abnormal data consistency. And then in this example, you'll see the visitors are all Android 8.0 or all Chrome 67.0.3396, so on and so forth. So again, abnormal data consistency. This doesn't look real. Okay, and then finally, using our analytics package, I call it Foo Analytics, we're able to look at click patterns. And in this case, you can kind of see where the buttons and navigation are on the page, right? So there's some natural clustering of the clicks. Whereas on the lower right-hand side, you'll see what bot click patterns look like. Right? So the bots are told to click repeatedly. And so it's almost like they click on the exact same location many, many, many times. You can't ask a whole bunch of humans to click exactly on the same pixel over and over again. So you can very clearly tell which ones are bots and which ones are real. So, in addition to Google Analytics, this is the tool set that I built and I use for myself and for some of my clients so that we can actually have more details to look at so that you can figure out what is fraud and what is not. So I'll pause there and then open it up for questions.
All right, cool. Wow. Thank you for the really scary presentation. I would say.
Well, hopefully it scares people into checking their own analytics a little bit more, because I think if you look at your own analytics, you'll be able to find some of these patterns that just can't be real. Humans don't behave that way. And then when you so it's really just digging deeper, and then you should be able to see it. And always ask hard questions.
All right, cool. The one question that I would like to ask now is, it would have been just before I saw this slide, but maybe you can elaborate a little bit. What can we do after we figure out that we have a problem in this?
So using that example, let me just go back a few slides. If you see that these sources, right, these referring sites look abnormal, right, you can check it a little bit further, but between these 4 different things, you can basically say, okay, well, these sites look like they're sending fake traffic, right? So I would just turn them off in the campaigns. So if you're either running search ads and some of those ads go on to these 4 sites, you would literally block them, right? So then your ads don't go on them anymore. And similarly, when you're running programmatic campaigns, you want to know which domains are eating up your impressions, or maybe which mobile apps are eating up your impressions. And if you have some data to say, okay, well, these are cheaters, right? They're clearly committing some kind of fraud. All you have to do is turn off the domain and turn off the mobile app so that you don't buy ads from them anymore.
Right, makes sense. So as with all things, detection is the hard part.
Yeah, and I think the key here is that you've probably heard of these fraud detection tech companies. I don't name them here, and I really didn't get into it, but their JavaScript tag detection is quite easily defeated, meaning the bots are good enough to either trick the detection or they can simply block their detection tag, right? So a bot that's trying to commit fraud will basically, it's almost like humans do ad blocking, right? The bots will simply block the detection tag so that they cannot be measured, right? Because they want to hide, they want to avoid getting detected. So in those cases, when you have a black box fraud detection, which means they just tell you, okay, it's 5% fraud, 10% fraud, but then they don't explain to you what was measured and how they measured it, then you have no way to tell whether that measurement is correct or not, right? So you kind of have to trust them that their number is accurate, and you have to keep paying them. So I call this analytics because if you look at your own analytics, or you use a tool like Foo Analytics, which I use all day long, you can actually start to see and understand, okay, well, here's a site that has 100% Android 8.0.0 traffic. Okay, now I understand why it's fraudulent, right? So if you start understanding, because you can see the data, then you can take the action of turning that off. Right. So to me, analytics is really about having the right data so you can understand why something is marked as fraudulent and then take an action and do something about it.
Right. Cool. Just the final question that we can take in our time slot is from Raluca. Thank you for the question. Is, do you know if there is any effort from analytics tools to eliminate these situations?
Yes, so some of them do, and I think GA does a pretty good job of it, right? So Google Analytics will be detecting for fraud and bots and things like that, and they're also filtering against the industry standard list. So the IAB here in the US has a list of 450 bots. So Google Analytics does scrub those out, right? It subtracts the bot traffic. But the problem with GA is that it doesn't tell you which bots they were and how much was scrubbed out. So then you're left with the final answer, right? The analytics, but then there's always discrepancies that you can't explain. So in Foo Analytics, we don't scrub it out. We literally mark it as bots and we leave it in there. So you can see, first of all, what it was and then what the quantity was. Because sometimes if you have a lot of bots coming to your site, right? So some publishers, the bots are coming to plagiarize the content. They're literally coming to scrape the content so that they can use it on other sites. So you need to know how much there was, right? What quantity of bots and also which ones they are. So then, if you know which ones they are, you can actually block them, right? So Google Analytics does a good job of it, but there's still a problem, which is they don't tell you which bots they were and how much. So that's why we don't scrub it. We present it so that you can actually see it for yourself.
All right. Cool. Well, thank you for the great presentation.
Thank you.
And we will be right back after the break with Cristi Movila, VTech's growth leader for Central and Eastern Europe. It's going to be a presentation about collaborative e-commerce. So see you guys a little bit later.